My name is Dr. Judith Grant. I'm the director of the Institutional Review Board at UTSA, and my office is within the Office of Research Integrity and Compliance at UTSA. And today I'm going to talk about ethics in the conduct of research. UTSA and ORIC, the Office of Research Integrity and Compliance, supports the ethical conduct of research in all realms, whether it involves human subjects, as overseen by the IRB, the office in which I particularly work, or animals, or research with telescopes, or research in the library that searches and reviews documents as the main source of information, or studies of other cultures and societies. Whatever realm that research takes place in, UTSA supports the ethical conduct of that research. Research, while not the only route to learning and discovery, is still one of our most valued and important routes to developing innovative treatments or ways of teaching or ways of understanding our world. And it's a primary way of learning how to maintain and enhance the quality of life for human beings and animals, and for enhancing understanding. So research is terribly important. It's not the only way of learning and understanding, but it's a very important way. Many university disciplines that make up UTSA are research-based, whether it's chemistry or biology or psychology or the College of Business Marketing area. All of these are research-based disciplines that contribute to learning and development in those areas. Research is a vital part of UTSA's future and the future of each of us as individuals. Ethical research is essential to ensure respect for research. Training in ethics is essential to promote ethical decision-making in the conduct of research. As science changes, the kinds of decisions we have to make change to ensure that we will conduct research in an ethical way. Because what we understood 20 years ago is not the current picture in which we operate. Scientific knowledge, scientific methods, scientific approaches have all changed, and we fully expect them to continue to change. And so we will continue to have to make decisions about how we'll conduct research and how we'll do it ethically. Ethics pertains to not only how we conduct research, but also to how we communicate the results of that research, whether it's publishing or teaching, but the various ways in which we use the results of what we learn in our research enterprise. The consequences of the unethical conduct of research are very serious. For one thing, unethical research contaminates scientific findings. We'll learn things, but we won't know what's true, what's not true, and our understanding will be thwarted. It can also lead to a loss of trust in the research enterprise. People, whether they're patients or marketers in the business enterprise or practitioners in any area of our society, will lose trust in the results of research. And that would be extremely detrimental. Unethical research can also result in loss of funding, that both individuals as researchers and institutions, such as universities, could lose funding for research if their research were known to be unethical. Individuals can also be debarred from conducting research in many areas. They can be debarred from ever receiving funding from many agencies if they have been found to be guilty of unethical research. So unethical research can do serious harm to the reputation of an institution as well as to the reputation of individuals. So there are very practical and very far-reaching consequences of unethical research. Ethical research is based upon a set of shared values, values that members of our society and of many societies share. Honesty in the communication of research findings and in the communication of research methods. Accuracy, care and emphasis upon care in reporting the detail of research. Accuracy in how research is carried out so that its methods are reliable. Efficiency in avoiding waste and using resources wisely, whether those resources be animals in research or material supplies or working with human beings in research. And finally, objectivity, avoiding bias in the conduct of research, avoiding bias in the interpretation of research. Those things are essential if research is to be conducted in an ethical way and will continue to be, in order to be continue to be respected by the members of our society and of the public at large. Historically, there have been quite a number of unethical research cases. And in many cases, they have taught us to take different steps to prevent the unethical conduct of research. Most people are aware of the Tuskegee study of the natural course of syphilis. In this particular study, during the course of this long-term research project, penicillin became known to be an effective treatment for the disease. But the subjects who were participating in this study were not informed of that fact, they were not provided that treatment, and they continued to suffer many of the negative effects, severe negative effects of this disease. Another example that we hear about in the news in current times are researchers who withhold negative findings from research or who withhold the report of adverse events, particularly in medical studies, in order to support the marketing of drugs and other pharmaceuticals. Another example of unethical research is our studies of oral contraceptives that were conducted in the 1970s, in which participants were not given informed consent, or were not allowed to make informed consent for the participation in studies of oral contraceptives, in which information about receiving a placebo was withheld from participants. And so the consequences of such practices are very predictable and lead to the mistrust of the research enterprise. When we think about the ethical conduct of research, we have to think about what do we mean by research? What is the framework in which we think about research? Generally, we think about research as a systematic investigation, including research development. And so that would include pilot research that's designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. And so when we are engaging in such activities, we need to ask ourselves the kinds of questions that will lead us to make ethical decisions that will support the conduct of the research. Most of the time when we think about ethics, we also think about regulations. We think about compliance. And in the area in which I work, one of my tasks is to ensure that regulations are followed. But there are times when ethical research may call for something slightly different than regulations. For example, there are times when regulations may allow someone to not obtain informed consent. But an ethical approach to research in some of these circumstances may require for a researcher to go an additional step. And so there are times when, in my office, we will ask investigators to obtain informed consent, even though technically a regulation might not demand that they do so, because we feel that providing information to individuals whom you're asking to participate in your research shows them more respect, leads to more respect for the research enterprise, and is the ethical thing to do. There are other times when regulations may demand that you do something, when the ethical approach may be different, and that would result in a dilemma. And often consultation may be required to resolve the appropriate course. So there are times when regulations may actually lead you to do something that violates an ethical approach. The kinds of ethical issues that arise from time to time vary, and certain things seem to be more in the forefront in certain periods of time than other things. Some of the issues that are currently being given a lot of attention in making decisions about ethical research include conflict of interest and issues in the responsible conduct of research. Many institutions currently evaluate conflicts of interest in the research enterprise in order to prevent bias in the design, the conduct, the analysis, and the interpretation of research. Conflicts of interest could include financial pressures, as when a company could benefit financially from the outcome of a research project, and through payments to an investigator, or bonuses, or consultation fees, could entice an investigator to possibly introduce some intended or unintended sources of bias in the research. But financial pressures aren't the only source. Just because you're not being funded to do research by someone who might not give you big awards in the future if your research doesn't come out the way they'd like, there are other sources of conflict of interest that can influence bias in research. Graduation may be a source of conflict of interest for graduate students. Pressure to graduate by a certain date might lead someone to take shortcuts, to eliminate some of the safety measures, or eliminate some of the reliability measures that are taking time. Or it may influence an investigator to reduce the number of subjects that they originally planned to participate in their study, but in order to finish on time, the science may be reduced in its value by having the number of participants cut short in order to meet the pressures of graduation. These kinds of pressures are real world, real daily life kinds of pressures. They're not unique, and they're the kinds of conflicts that we often face. Promotion pressures are another source of conflict of interest for faculty members. The need to publish in prestigious journals can pressure a faculty member to hope that his research will come out a particular way. And once again, it may lead to intended or it may lead to unintended sources of bias in the interpretation of research. Personal and professional relationships can also introduce conflicts of interest. One of the things that institutional review boards often do is that they do not permit individuals who have a relationship with investigators, whether it's a supervisory relationship or a personal relationship, to participate in the review of studies in which such a possible conflict exists. Conflicts of interest are unavoidable. They're part of our daily life. But in order to reduce or eliminate their impact upon research, we attempt resolutions. One way is to eliminate the conflicts of interest when that's possible, disclose the conflicts so that people are aware of the existence of the conflicts so that their unintended influences may be minimized, or manage those conflicts. Sometimes you can introduce secondary checks on the data to ensure that unintended biases don't creep in. And so there are numbers of very intelligent ways that we can use to manage conflicts, to reduce them when we can't eliminate them, or to manage them when we can't eliminate them, but thereby minimize their possible impact upon the conduct or interpretation of research. To guide us in making ethical decisions, because as science changes, new decisions will come to the forefront, and we'll have to reevaluate research. This isn't a matter of making good decisions now and always being able to apply them. In 5 years, science will differ. We'll have to reapproach the design of studies and reconsider what might be possible sources of bias, given our knowledge at the time. And to guide us in making those decisions, we often rely upon codes of ethics that guide us in identifying important issues that we can consider and that will hopefully guide us to make better decisions. The primary code of ethics in the United States for human subjects research is known as the Belmont Report. But it's not the only code of ethics that guides research. So the Belmont Report is a very commonly used ethical guide, and I'll talk about it more shortly. The Declaration of Helsinki is another ethical code, and it's often used in guiding international and biomedical research. The American Psychological Association has a long-established code of ethics that guides therapeutic relationships, teaching relationships, as well as research activities. The American Anthropological Association also has a code of ethics that guides its researchers and can guide the public in thinking about anthropological research. There are also guidelines of the Oral History Association for how to ethically conduct oral history investigations. All of these codes of ethics aren't totally separate and different. There are overlaps. And sometimes one will cover areas of research or areas of bias that another might not cover. But there is a lot of overlap that guides us in helping to think about how to ethically conduct research. The Belmont Report, which was developed in the second half of the 20th century, has promulgated 3 major principles to guide decisions in considering human subjects research. Those three principles have to do with respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So they're just three principles, but they're very helpful and very far-reaching in guiding our consideration of research that involves people. Respect for persons as an ethical principle refers to respecting the right of individuals to decide for themselves if they want to participate in research. It promotes the idea of informed consent. It stands for the idea that people should be provided adequate information in order to decide if they want to participate or not. It works to prevent situations in which people are taken advantage of when they're not informed about research that they end up participating in. And it promotes the idea that we need to respect the individual and allow them to decide for themselves if they want to participate or not. Another aspect of respect for persons is the idea that there are certain groups in society who may have difficulty giving informed consent. And so there are vulnerable populations who, due to their biology or due to their situation in life, face impediments or challenges in making decisions about whether or not they want to participate. Examples include children who, by lack of maturity, are not able to really consider the far-reaching consequences, possibly, of participating. Another example of a vulnerable population who may not be able to provide informed consent easily are prisoners. If prison guards are permitted to influence the participation of prisoners in research, there may be undue pressures, either by the guards or projected by prisoners in order to please guards when making decisions about participating. So prisoners are regarded as a vulnerable population. In many college campuses, such as UTSA, students are regarded as a vulnerable population. When faculty members invite students, their own students, to participate in research, it's possible that undue pressures could be exerted, or undue pressures could be perceived by students even if they don't objectively exist. And so the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board, uses guidelines to protect students when they participate in research, to reduce pressures by faculty members, to encourage students to participate when they might not want to. And so the core elements of respect for persons are providing informed consent, or for, in the case of vulnerable populations, for instituting extra protections to ensure that their rights and their welfare are protected. A second basic principle in the Belmont Report, or the Belmont Principles, is the principle of beneficence, the idea that the benefits of research should outweigh the risks. The benefits can be directly to the participants, as in the case of some instances of medical research or educational research in which new methods of teaching are being tested. But they can also be in the form of knowledge to be gained. One of the concepts that emerged out of the Nuremberg Code, another ethical code of research, is the idea that research should be adequately designed such that it has a possibility or a prospect of resulting in knowledge. That if it's so badly designed it can't contribute anything, it's unethical to conduct. And so individuals who evaluate research for beneficence look at the benefit, the potential benefit of the research relative to the risks that might present to individuals who are being asked to participate. And when possible, IRBs attempt to minimize risks. They can't always eliminate them, but they may be able to identify risks present in research, whether it's physical risks or risks of confidentiality, and look for ways to minimize those risks relative to the benefits that may accrue from that research. The third important principle from the Belmont Report is the principle of justice. The idea of the justice principle is that the benefits of research shouldn't all go to any one group in society, nor should all the burdens fall on a single group in society. And so one of the things in evaluating research, we looked for equitable selection of subjects. Can all groups who would benefit from the research have an opportunity to participate? Can all groups who could benefit from the knowledge that will come from the research have an opportunity to participate in the research so that knowledge about that group can be obtained? Not so very long ago, many areas of medical research were limited to research on white Anglo-Saxon males. That participation of women, participation of pregnant women, and participation of children was very limited. While that may protect those individuals in the immediate sense, they're also put at a disadvantage in terms of knowledge to be gained from the research. And so there's some areas of medical knowledge that for many years were lacking as it applied to women, pregnant women, and children. The National Institutes of Health today have a presumption of inclusion in order to ensure that knowledge has an opportunity to develop in a more just manner. In my own experience, I saw a big shift in thinking about clinical trials in the early 1990s, in the period of HIV and AIDS treatment. And so access to research became more valued. That in the early 90s, the best treatments, and in some cases the only treatments for persons with HIV were available through clinical trials. And so access to those trials in terms of justice was brought to the forefront. Participation in clinical trials was not just seen as being treated as a guinea pig, but actually offering a benefit that was very important. So the Belmont principles are used to guide a lot of decisions by IRBs and by others thinking about the ethical conduct of research involving people. When it comes to animals, there are also considerations for ethical conduct. Some of the issues that researchers with animals think about are the appropriate selection of species to study. That convenience is not an appropriate criteria, but selecting a model that selecting a species that offers an appropriate model is very important. Another ethical consideration that has to do with not wasting resources and being responsible in the treatment of animals is scientifically approaching the appropriate number of animals to study so that you collect enough data that you can interpret your results, but not wasting the lives of animals by excessively experimenting with animals. Another ethical principle that researchers with animals and researchers with humans take into mind is reducing pain and suffering. For animals, it's often physical pain and suffering. It may be physical pain and suffering with human subjects, but it may be embarrassment or effort or privacy concerns with human beings that are taken into consideration. Another issue that is shared with both animal research and with human research is, when possible, using other approaches when that's reasonable to generating good, sound research findings. For example, currently we can use computer models, or we can study real-life occurrences when they're relevant to answering research questions, rather than placing either animals or humans in situations of pain or discomfort or inconvenience in generating research findings. Research ethics isn't limited to just research with animals or research with people. It also comes into play even in library research. Probably the first area of research ethics that many of us learned about in junior high school or high school was the issue of plagiarism. That research findings or research data that's presented should be appropriately attributed to the source of that data, rather than copied and appropriate credit not given. And so plagiarism is another source of unethical research behavior that should be avoided. Using the contributions of others in developing our research is very important, but also the issue of appropriate attribution for those findings. Other sources of ethical issues in research have to do with falsification of data, which would certainly contaminate research findings, determining appropriate authorship and publication as an important issue in research findings, in research publication. Responsible mentoring of students and fellows conducting research is also an issue that we think about in terms of ethical conduct of research. Mentors need to promote good learning situations and avoid situations that take advantage of those who work under someone who's a mentor. Decisions about who owns research data is another issue that emerges as a controversial issue. When students work with faculty members, or when faculty members work with other faculty members, it's appropriate to have discussions and come to decisions about the authorship order early in the research process, so that interpersonal conflicts don't affect the conduct of research, and that people have appropriate credit for their contributions to the research enterprise. Another ethical issue that arises in research is, what role is there for deception in research? There are famous examples of deception in research, such as the study by Stanley Milgram. Most psychology students are familiar with the research that Dr. Milgram conducted In his study, he looked at the kinds of pressures that could be put upon individuals to behave in ways that went beyond what they expected that they would ordinarily do. In his particular study, he instructed people to use electric shock to motivate individuals to learn. In point of fact, no electrical shock was involved, but in the study, individuals were led to believe that their actions were causing pain to other individuals. Milgram was interested in how people respond in authority situations and when they will go beyond the kind of behaviors that they might not ordinarily think they would do. The deception in the study has been considered a very controversial topic because individuals learned negative things about themselves. They learned that they would violate what they previously believed they might do. And so anytime we use deception in research, we have to carefully consider its impact upon the subjects, and is it absolutely necessary in order to carry out the research. Studies in medicine often use placebos, in which people are not fully informed if they're getting the actual medication or they're getting, quote, a sugar pill or some other inert substance. The use of placebos can be very important in interpreting the effects of medication because people's expectations may actually influence how they respond to something. But some of the guidelines that we often use now in dealing with either placebos or other instances of deception demand that we only use deception when it's essential, when the research can't be carried out otherwise, and that individuals be informed of the deception afterwards. Deception should be used very carefully. It shouldn't be used simply as a convenient way of avoiding more effortful ways of conducting research. And it can be important in evaluating hypotheses that if people were told of ahead of time, they might not respond in a natural way. But care should be taken in choosing to use deception in research and use it very sparingly. And one of the basic principles that psychologists and others often use is that deception should not be used if it would affect a subject's willingness to be in a study. That we shouldn't go beyond that barrier in the use of deception. Publication also is another area where ethical issues emerge. Redundant publication, where the same research results are presented slightly differently, may lead people to think that there's been more research done than is actually the case. And so redundant publication that doesn't fairly communicate that it was the same individuals or the same subjects or the same animals involved, and not rather than multiple different experiments or studies, is considered unethical because it could lead to a misattribution of the weight of research findings. It may look like there's more research than has actually been done. I've mentioned authorship issues. Authorship issues should be discussed, although it may be very uncomfortable for people sometimes to discuss these issues. it often resolves or prevents later problems if those kind of issues are discussed up front and their decisions about authorship order early in the research process. Failure to publish negative results is another potential ethical issue. Studies don't always come out. Sometimes they don't come out because they're not well done. Other times the predicted results don't occur because that's an accurate representation of reality. When negative results are not published, science has an incorrect picture of what has been tested. We may not have a clear picture of how much research favors particular outcomes versus how much doesn't favor that predicted outcome. One of the new approaches by NIH and other institutes is that clinical trials need to be registered so that there's a clear opportunity to evaluate trials that may not have come out in the predicted direction and that may not get published in some usual venues. Underpowering trials is another unethical practice that can result in biased reporting of findings. When a trial is underpowered and an experimental condition is found not to differ from a comparison condition, the failure to find a difference may be due to the lack of power rather than the actual difference in the two conditions. In some marketing efforts, there may be a desire to say that this condition is just as good as this one. See, there's no difference. And yet the failure to find a difference may be more accurately attributed to failure to test it effectively using too little statistical power rather than a fair testing of the comparison. So from publication to design, or the other order, the entire course of research can be fraught with difficult decisions. Ethical research aims to prevent bias in both the design, the conduct, the analysis, and the interpretation of the research. And ethical research can lead to greater respect for research findings and greater respect for the research enterprise. And so UTSA, as part of its teaching mission, wants to promote more knowledge about making ethical decisions in the research process to promote respect for research. Thank you.